I used to joke that snow makes everything quiet, like it's covering the noise with a blanket. That's how it felt on the night this all started. Even the plow sounded muted, like the blades were pushing through pillows instead of wet slush. It was the kind of night where you can see your breath inside the cab, and the radio turns into this tinny whisper that you turn up, and it still sounds far away. I was working the night shift for County Roads because my other job fell through, and honestly, I didn't have anything better to do. The winters pay well if you take every shift you can. And the fact is, I've always liked night driving. It makes sense. You can see what your headlights see, and that's the whole world for a little while. Plus, there's something about being the first set of tracks down a road that says, I was here. Dumb, but real. Anyway, it was mid-January, one of those storms they name and then forget about until someone brings it up in April like a joke. The kind of cold that grabs your nose hairs and makes you sneeze. The kind of wind that finds every crack in the cab, like it has a grudge. The call came in from dispatch around 1 a.m, highway turnoff near Black Pine Lake. Visibility poor. Might be a stuck vehicle, was all they said. That could mean anything. And usually it meant a couple from Spokane who didn't realize that a whiteout is not a fun Instagram story. I figured I'd clear the turnout, check for a car angled into the drift, maybe call a tow if I had to. 15 minutes, tops. I turned the plow onto Route 17 and watched the snow come at me like static. There's a feeling you get when you've been awake too long, and the road starts to look like it's moving under you, instead of you moving over it. I fought that feeling with coffee that tasted like paper filter and disappointment. I had the heat on full, but it never caught up. I was wearing 2 pairs of socks, and my toes still felt like wood. When I reached the turnout, I saw the drift first, piled up like a white wall, and then I saw the shape in front of it. I almost kept going. The brain is weird that way. You expect a car, and when you don't see a car, you assume it's nothing. But the shape was wrong. It wasn't a lump the way a rock looks under snow. It was long, with this smooth rise for the shoulder and a dip for the waist and then legs that were too straight. I stopped the plow in the middle of the road and left the engine idling. I told myself I was just going to brush some snow away to see if it was a downed signpost. That's not what I thought, not really. I grabbed the little LED spotlight I keep with the flares and climbed down, and the wind hit me like it had been waiting. Up close, the details came in one by one. A boot, black and scuffed, the cuff of a pair of jeans, hair dark and frozen into a hard shape like a helmet, and then a face. People always say the dead look like they're sleeping. They don't. They look like their face is a mask, and someone set it on wrong. Her eyes were open, and they had frost in the lashes. Her mouth was parted a little, and there was snow inside. It had drifted there. I remember that clearly. The snow had drifted into her mouth. I said out loud, "Shit." Like I'd dropped a tool, like I could pick it up. I backed away and slipped and almost went down, then caught myself on my hands. The snow went down my gloves and burned. I stood up and looked around expecting, I don't know, something. Like the person who put her there was going to be standing in the trees. There was nothing. Just the trees and the wind and the plow grumbling like it was bored. I called dispatch. I tried to sound calm. I think I got a body, I said. It sounded wrong in my mouth. Female. Black Pine Lake turnout. No vehicle. I heard the dispatcher inhale before she answered. She told me to stay put. Sheriff's office was on the way. I clicked the radio off and then turned it back on because the quiet felt worse. I know how this next part sounds. I wish I'd done it differently, but I took a picture. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd need to prove it to myself later. Maybe I thought someone was going to blame me and I'd better have something. I snapped one with my phone, and the flash went off and made the whole world blue for a second. The image burned in my eyes. Her hair frozen into a solid wave, her eyelashes like white needles. The flash made the frost in her eyes sparkle. I stepped back, careful where I put my feet. That's when I realized there weren't any footprints. Not new ones, at least. There were mine, of course. The plow tracks. But nothing leading to her, and nothing leading away from her. Just a woman lying in the snow as if someone had dropped her from the sky. You start to calculate as your brain tries to make sense of it. Maybe the wind had drifted over the prints. Maybe she'd walked on the road and then stepped off. Maybe a car had pulled up earlier and the snow had filled in. I looked for tire tracks and didn't see any. The wind was strong, but not that strong, and the snow wasn't dry enough to drift that fast. I'm telling you, it looked like she had fallen there from nowhere. I put the plow's hazard lights on. I walked back to the body and I crouched and I held the light and I looked for anything obvious. A wallet, a bag, a phone, no purse, no backpack, no signs of a struggle. Her jacket was thin, not winter gear, not the kind of thing you wear by accident in a storm like this. It was more like a fashion jacket. The zipper was half up. Her hands were bare. Her fingers had that white and yellow look of deep frostbite. I didn't touch her. I know someone will ask. I didn't. I knew better. The sheriff's cruiser showed up after maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like longer. The road was empty, and the wind was steady, and the snow was filling the footprints I'd left. When the cruiser finally slid into view with its bars going, the lights turned the falling snow that weird alien pink and blue, and I felt relief like heat. Deputy first. That was Eric Dodd. He's a big guy, heavy, that farmer kind of heavy where he looks like he could lift a hay bale with one hand. He recognized me. Everybody knows everybody here. Ricky, he said, nodding at me in that way like it wasn't a surprise to see me standing over something bad. He knelt in the snow by her side and did the flashlight thing like he'd seen it in a movie. I watched his face tighten. "You touch anything?" he asked. "No," I said. Sheriff Hill came up behind him. Hill is quiet even when he's not trying to be. He's the kind of guy who thinks a lot before he says anything, and it makes people lean in and wait. He looked down at her and then up at me. "How long since you got here?" he said. 20 minutes, I said. 30, maybe. He squinted at the road. "You see a vehicle?" "No." "You notice footprints?" That was Dodd. I exhaled and gestured at the fresh field like it could answer for me. "Just mine. And the plow tracks." There's a dance that happens in small towns when something like this goes down. Everyone knows the unwritten steps. You stand where you're told. You answer sharp and short. You don't speculate out loud. You don't text a friend until you're home, and the news has already hit Facebook, and it doesn't feel like you're the one spilling it. They put up flares and angled the cruiser to cover us, and waited for the coroner's van. The three of us stood there, and there's no way to explain how the quiet works except to tell you I heard the pounding of my own heart under all the wind, like the sound you hear when you put a seashell to your ear and someone tells you it's the ocean. I kept looking at her face and then at the trees. The idea that we were standing in someone else's active scene made my skin itch. The coroner, Carla Ames, is as no-nonsense as they come. She wears this ridiculous red hat with a pom-pom on top that makes her look like she's about to sled down a hill with kids. And somehow, it doesn't make her less serious. She climbed out, took one look, and her breath misted in a long, slow stream. "Exposure," she said, almost to herself. "But we'll see." While she took pictures, I backed away and looked out at the lake. You can't see the water from the turnout. It's behind a thin line of trees. But you can feel it. The current under the ice makes the wind run in a straight line like a hallway. There's a bunch of old cabins on the far side, and the Black Pine Lodge sits up on a little hill next to a row of birches. I could see the lodge lights from where I stood, a dull glow behind thick curtains. I don't know why, but that got me. The idea that there was this warm place up there, and this woman was down here freezing. It made me mad. Not at anyone, just at the unfairness of the map of this place. I wanted for a second to run up there and bang on the door and ask them why they weren't looking out their windows. Like I said, I know that's not rational. It's just what I felt. Carla crouched to check the woman's pockets and held up a small metal key on one of those motel fobs, the kind with a big plastic diamond and a room number stamped into it. The numbers were scratched and hard to read, but I knew the color of the plastic. Black Pine Lodge uses brass tags, or they used to, but last year they switched to these cheap plastic ones. I know because my cousin had his wedding there, and we all left with keys by mistake. Carla wiped the snow off and squinted. 17, she said. Deputy Dodd glanced up at the lights on the hill and then at Sheriff Hill. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. It was obvious even to me. They took the body. I watched the way they did it. They used a board and a bag, and it was respectful, slow, but the wind kept trying to get in the way, like it wanted her back. Dodd carried the bag, and I was stupidly grateful for that, because I didn't want it to be me, and I didn't want to watch Carla do it either. "Thanks, Rick," Hill said when they were done. "We'll need your statement at the office tomorrow." "You want me to plow?" I asked, half because I didn't know what else to do. "Leave this stretch for now," he said. "We'll mark it." I climbed back into the plow and sat there until my hands stopped shaking, then turned the heater to full and drove east, letting the blade bite down and send the white spray out in a fan. The radio was all whispers again. Someone said something about a jackknife trailer near mile 59. I barely heard it. That should have been the end of me in this story. That's where it should have ended. But it didn't. The thing about seeing a dead person, especially out of place like that, is that your brain keeps trying to redo the moment later. Like a dog that wants to drop a toy at your feet so you'll throw it again. I kept seeing her eyes. I kept telling myself I should have closed them, like in a movie. I kept telling myself I should have done something. I didn't sleep when I got home. I made toast and watched the dark turn pale through my kitchen window, and I felt like I had frost still on me. Around 9 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was my friend Casey, who is one of those people who always seems to know things half an hour before everyone else. "You out by Black Pine last night?" he texted. I stared at the screen. "Yeah." "You see it?" I typed and deleted. I didn't want to be the person confirming it, and I didn't want to lie. "Yeah." "Holy shit. You okay?" "I think so." He sent a photo of the road, taken from a distance. Flares a sheriff's cruiser, the back end of a van. News says they found a woman. No ID yet. "Yeah," I wrote. "Let me know if you want to talk." Casey means well. He's the kind of guy who will help you move a couch at midnight. But he's also stirred up by the same curiosity that stirs up everyone in a small town when something happens. The difference is he'll admit it. He called me 10 minutes later. "You want to go up to the lodge?" he said. "What for?" "Room 17, he said. "I mean, that's where the key was from, right? News says it was from the lodge. I know a guy there. We could ask who checked in." He was right that he knew a guy. Casey always knows a guy. He also has a way of making stupid ideas sound like reasonable errands. "I don't know," I said. He sighed into the phone like he'd been expecting that answer. "Okay," he said. "But you're going to think about it all day anyway. We could at least go ask. If we don't, we'll hear some story on Facebook about her being from Florida and wandering off, and then we'll never really know." I stared at the snow in my yard. It was clean and smooth, even where I knew there were steps under it that I'd made the day before. "Okay," I said, "but we just ask. We don't. We're not going to creep around." "Obviously," he said, which meant we were going to creep around. We took his truck because it has better tires. The sky had cleared to that white blue that looks like the whole world is made of refrigerator light. The plows had been through the highway, and the edges were stacked up like waves frozen mid-crash. When we turned onto the lodge road, the tires squealed in that icy way that makes your stomach squinch. Black Pine Lodge is a spread of wooden buildings that look older than they are. Everything is stained dark and trimmed in lighter wood, and there are antlers over half the doors, even the bathrooms. They stay open through winter mostly for snowmobilers and hunters. The main building was lit up and smelled like coffee and burned bacon. Behind the desk was a guy I recognized named Aaron. He grew up here, moved away for a while, moved back for a girl. The girl left. He stayed. He gave us a look like he was ready to ask if we were guests, and if not, could we leave? Please. Because everything is quiet right now, and we like it that way. Then he recognized Casey, and it softened a little. "Hey," he said. "You guys hear the news?" "We heard," Casey said. "We wanted to check on you." That was a lie wrapped in a truth. We did want to check, but not on him. Aaron rolled his jaw like the memory was stuck there. "Cops were here late," he said. "Room 17. "Who checked in?" Casey asked it like he was asking the weather forecast. Aaron hesitated. "You know I can't say that," he said. And then he glanced past us like he was making sure nobody else was in earshot. "She checked in yesterday afternoon." That's what I heard anyway. Alone, paid cash, no luggage. "You recognize her?" I asked. His eyes narrowed. "You saw her?" He was putting together that I was involved. I raised my hands like I had to admit it. I was plowing. I found her on the turnout. He exhaled. I'm sorry you had to see that. He rubbed his temple. No, I didn't recognize her. She wasn't from around here. You can tell. The coat, shoes. Not right for this time of year. She asked for a room in the back. 17. Didn't ask about the bar. Didn't ask about the trails. Back? I said. Which way is that? He pointed down a long hall. Up the stairs, end of the hall on the left. Why? Just curious how far it is to the lake, Casey said. Close, Aaron said. Path runs down between the birches. We thanked him and headed toward the hall like we were going to the bar. We didn't go to the bar. We went up the stairs like we were staying there. I told myself we were going to look at the door and then head back. I don't know why that seemed like it would help, but it did. The hall upstairs was silent. There's a different kind of quiet in hotels when they're empty. It's like the place is holding its breath so it doesn't wake anyone up out of habit. Room 17 was at the end, as Aaron said, by a window where frost had drawn ferns on the glass. The door had a little brass number under the peephole. It looked like every other door. Don't, I said when Casey reached for the knob. I'm not going in, he said. Just seeing if it's locked. Before I could say anything, the latch clicked and the door moved inward a hair. He pulled his hand back like he'd been burned. We stared at the crack. He pushed softly and the door swung open. The room was still, like someone had just stepped out and would be back any minute. The curtains were closed. The bed was made, except there was an indent on one side like someone had sat there. On the table next to the bed was a glass with a smear of lipstick. On the desk by the window was a folded brochure for winter trail maps and a pen with the lodge logo. The bathroom door was open and the light was on. A towel lay crumpled on the floor like a dead animal. Hey, I said. No. Just a second, Casey said. He stepped in, stayed to the carpet runner, and grabbed the brochure off the desk. She used this, he said. He touched the corner like he was afraid it would bite. Let's go, I said. My chest felt tight. He nodded and we backed out, gentle like we were leaving a sleeping baby alone, and pulled the door shut until it clicked. We stood in the hall and listened to the silence fill back in. What were you expecting? He asked. And it wasn't mean. He honestly wanted to know. I don't know, I said. A note. Blood. Something. The next dumb thing we did was go outside and follow the path to the lake. The wind cut through us like we were wearing paper. The trees ticked as the ice shifted in the bark. The path was hard-packed and shadowed, and when we came out between the birches, the lake was laid out in front of us, like a white plate. There were snowmobile tracks crossing it, faint and blown over. A set of footprints went from the back of the lodge to the shed near the boat launch, then stopped where the drift got deep and uneven. We looked all around for another set. I didn't see any going out toward the turnout. That made sense. The path to the turnout is on the other side of a stand of firs, and you wouldn't walk it in a storm unless you had to. We stood there with our hands jammed into our armpits and our faces tucked down into our collars and felt, both of us, something neither of us wanted to say. We were being watched. That sounds paranoid. I know. But it was real. The lodge windows were like eyes behind the birches. The woods were a mouth that didn't want to talk. The lake was a blank face. We headed back up and thanked Aaron for the coffee he didn't actually give us. And we left. Driving away, we didn't talk for a while. People always imagine they know what they'll say in a moment like this. You don't. You say the everyday stuff. Roads are slick. Need to put salt down. Think it's going to snow again? You let your brain sneak up on the real subject. Halfway down the drive, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and checked it because I'm an idiot, and because human reflex is stronger than road safety sometimes. Unknown number. The text said, "You shouldn't have gone in there." I stared at it long enough that we drifted and hit the shoulder, and Casey swore and grabbed the wheel. "What the hell are you doing?" he said. I didn't answer. I held the phone up so he could see. His eyes flicked down. He swallowed. "Who's that?" "I don't know," I said. It buzzed again. Same number. A photo this time. It was me, standing by the body on the turnout, the light from my phone making my face a mask. It was taken from the trees behind me. The rest of the drive back is gone in my memory. I know we made it to my place. I know Casey stood in my kitchen with his hat in his hands like it was a problem to solve. I know I was sick to my stomach and went to the bathroom and put my face under the faucet and let the cold water hit me until my scalp hurt. When I came back out, Casey was staring at the photo like he could make it say something. "This was last night," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. Who would have been there?" He said it slow, like he wanted me to say, "Nobody," so he could argue with me. "I didn't see anyone," I said. "And who knew we went to the lodge?" "Aaron," I said. "And whoever sent this." Casey set the phone on the table like he was putting down a hot plate. "We should go to the sheriff." "We will," I said. "But let's think for a second. If we go in there and say some anonymous number sent me a photo, they'll take the phone. They'll say they'll look into it, and they'll call us when they know something. And maybe they will. But if this is someone in town, it's going to get to the wrong ears fast. If this is someone at the lodge, same deal. You think we're being dumb?" "I think we've already been dumb," I said. "We were dumb to go up there. Now we gotta be smart." He was quiet for a second. "What does being smart look like?" I thought about the key fob, the number 17, the lipstick on the glass, the towel on the bathroom floor. "I want to know who she was," I said. "I want to know why her key ended up in her pocket and not on the nightstand. I want to know why there were no footprints. I want to know who is taking pictures in the trees." "Those are a lot of wants," he said. "Yeah." We started with the obvious places. The lodge has security cameras in the hallways and over the front desk because someone stole a mounted elk head one Thanksgiving and the owner never got over it. If the woman checked in, there should be footage. If she left her room, there should be footage. I called Aaron and asked if we could come back. He said the sheriff had already asked for the footage. "I'm not supposed to talk about it," he said. "Just tell me if she was alone," I said. He hesitated. "She was alone at the desk," he said. "I didn't check the hall cameras yet. Sheriff is sending someone. I gotta go." He hung up. Okay. Dead end. At least for the moment. We tried the local Facebook group next, which is a swamp of lost dogs, complaints about fireworks, and people arguing about whether the coffee at the gas station has gotten worse over time. There was a thread already about incident near Black Pine, and half the comments were people speculating about drunk snowmobilers or meth. One person said they saw a woman walking by the highway yesterday in a thin jacket, looked out of place, and asked if anyone gave her a ride. No one answered. There was one photo in that thread, taken at a distance, maybe the same woman, walking east. That was all. Then I made a mistake. I texted the unknown number. I typed, "Who are you?" and hit send. I regretted it the second it went. It was like stepping onto ice that might hold and feeling it crack just a little under your weight. Nothing came back for a minute, and I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Then the typing bubble appeared and went away and came back, like the person didn't know what to say either. Finally, "I told you to stay out." I stared at it. My fingers were cold even inside the house. "What do you want?" I typed, "for it to be left alone." "What is it?" No answer. I tried again. "Who is she?" Still nothing. I handed the phone to Casey because I didn't want to be the one holding it when it chimed again. He put it face down on the table, and we just sat there like two kids waiting for a teacher to call our names. The phone stayed quiet. We made a plan that wasn't really a plan. We'd drive by the lodge again after dark and see if anyone was going in or out of room 17. We'd walk the path behind the lodge and look for tracks that we might have missed. We'd keep an eye on our phones. We'd go to the sheriff in the morning if we had nothing. I napped and dreamed of being stuck in the plow cab with snow filling it in like sand. I woke up with my heart pounding and the room dark. Casey was back, standing by the window, his shape cut out of the streetlight. "You ready?" he said. We drove out with the headlights off for longer than we should have, then turned them on at the last second like that would make a difference. There were 2 cars in the lodge lot besides Aaron's truck, a Honda with plates from Oregon and an old Chevy with a cracked taillight that I recognized from town. No sheriff's cruiser. We parked near the road so we could leave fast if we had to. We walked around the side and followed the path behind the building. The snow was hard enough to hold our weight if we stepped slow. The birches creaked. The lake made a sound like a sigh. It was colder than the night before, the kind of cold that makes your teeth hurt. The window of room 17 was dark. One room over was lit, curtains closed but a glow showing through. Down the hall to the right were 2 more lit windows. Someone laughed. It sounded wrong, thin and high. It might have been a TV. We made it to the spot where the path meets the lake's edge. The boat shed was a hump in the dark. There were fresh tracks we hadn't seen earlier. Thin marks in a pattern you get from dragging something on a sled or a toboggan. They started behind the shed, cut across the hardpack, and went down to the lake and along the shore under the line of trees like someone wanted the wind to erase them. We followed. I told myself we were being brave, and I told myself we were being stupid, and both felt true. The drag marks were faint, but there. Every so often you could see where the sled caught and left a deeper groove. What bothered me, more than the marks themselves, was that there were no footprints beside them. Not regular ones, not ones that matched up. The sled drifted like it was pulled by the wind. Here and there I saw these little deep single holes, spaced far apart. A walking stick, I thought, or a spike. We came to a spot where the drag marks curved toward the trees and ended at a shallow mound of snow that looked wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate. There was a ripped piece of the kind of blue plastic tarp you get at hardware stores sticking out like the tongue of something dead. The wind had been at it, so the top layer of snow was smooth, but you could see the shape underneath. Long, human. Casey made a sound, low in his throat, like he was trying to swallow a yell. "No," he said. "Don't," I said, and I grabbed his arm. He was reaching toward the tarp like he was going to pull it up, like a curtain. "Don't." He stopped and stood there shivering. It wasn't the cold. "This is not right," he said. "I know," I said. We took a step back, and the snow under Casey's foot broke, and he went down to his knee in a hole and swore, and he made a laughing noise that wasn't really a laugh. He pulled his leg up and held his foot in his hands and said, "Shit, shit, shit." And I thought he was hurt until I saw what he was looking at. In the hole his keel had punched, there was a strip of fabric, red, like from a coat. It had been buried and the hole had exposed it. The cut edge was clean, like someone had sliced it. There was something dark on it. Blood, I thought, and hated myself for being the person who thinks in words when his body wants to run. We backed away, slow like the snow was thin glass. I took out my phone and took a photo. The flash popped and turned the trees into a flat wall that looked painted. The after image hung in my eyes while we retreated to the path and then to the side of the lodge. We didn't run, because running felt like a different decision than the ones we'd been making. In the lot, the Oregon Honda was gone. The Chevy was still there. Aaron's truck was still there, but snow was piling in the bed. The lobby lights were on. We went inside and the heat felt wrong, like it didn't belong to us. Aaron looked up when we came in and tried to shape his face into a normal greeting, and didn't make it. He said, "Hey," and his voice broke. "We need to show you something," I said. He took one look at my face and came out from behind the desk. We led him to the back door and out onto the path and then to the edge of the trees, and I was about to point to the mound when I saw it wasn't there. I don't mean I couldn't see it. I mean it wasn't there. The snow was smooth where the mound had been. The drag marks were gone. The little spike holes were gone. The hole Casey had fallen into was filled, like a hand had pressed snow into it. "Where?" Aaron said, and he sounded annoyed, like we were messing with him. "It was right there," I said. "We're not kidding." He peered into the dark and shook his head. "I can't be doing this with you right now," he said. "I can't. The sheriff said if anyone came sniffing around, I was supposed to send them to him." "We're not sniffing," Casey said, and it sounded silly even then. "We found something and now it's gone." Aaron rubbed his hands over his face. "Please go," he said. "I mean it. I'm not messing around. I'll call the sheriff. I'll tell him you were here." We went. We went fast because every nerve said going is the right thing. As we reached the lot, we heard a sound that has lived in my brain ever since. It was the scrape of something heavy being dragged across packed snow, punctuated by a crunch, then another scrape, and it came from our left, from the trees. It wasn't loud. It was careful, We turned our heads in slow, perfect sync. I had my phone up without thinking, taking a picture with a flash I knew would give me an image I didn't want. The flash went off, and for one white second, I saw the scene 100 feet away like it was day. A man, bundled in a huge parka with a fur-edged hood pulled tight, face a dark hole in the shadow. He was dragging a sled with something long on it wrapped in blue tarp and rope. He was using a long pole to push and steer. He was looking at us through the hood. He saw us, and we saw him. And then the light was gone, and the after image was in my eyes, and there was only black and wind. "Get in the truck," I said. My voice was a stranger. We climbed in, and the doors didn't close right away because the seals were cold and stiff. I pictured the man crossing the lot with the sled and the long pole, and I slammed the lock with the heel of my hand. Casey started the engine, and it sounded like a reluctant animal. Headlights on. The beams cut the blowing snow into sharp lines. There was nothing in front of us but road and trees, and the idea of that hooded shape in the periphery. We drove back to town, too fast, and neither of us said anything. When we reached my house, I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. We both wanted witnesses around us, even if they were asleep behind closed doors. We wanted neighbors and streetlights, and the idea that if we yelled, someone would hear. Inside, I sat on the floor of my kitchen because I didn't want to be near a window. I thought about calling the sheriff, but Aaron had said he would. And also, I'll be honest, I didn't want to be the idiot in the next small-town story about the guy who sees monsters in the trees, and it turns out it was a snowmobile club's clown. I figured I'd sleep 2 hours and call in the morning when my brain was less fried. At 3 a.m, another text buzzed. Same unknown number. The photo was of me again, this time from the side, walking with Casey along the lodge path. You could see the back of the building. You could see the birches. You could see the outline of the boat shed. The caption under the photo said, "Your friend should watch his step." I stared at the words and felt my hands go numb in a new way. What did that mean? That they saw his foot go through the crust? That they were near enough to see? That they... No, I don't want to think about what they meant. I texted back, "Who are you?" No reply. I didn't sleep. I sat on my kitchen floor with the phone in my hand and drank coffee that made my hands shake worse. At 8, the light looked like light should look again, and I called the sheriff's office and asked to talk to Hill. The receptionist put me on hold, and the hold music was the kind of gentle guitar that makes you feel like you're in a dentist's waiting room. After a minute, Hill picked up. I could tell by the way he said my name, flat and patient, that he already knew there was a mess brewing. I told him what we found. I told him about the sled. I told him about the text messages and the pictures. I kept my voice even and used words like observed and location, because I wanted him to hear me as a person telling him facts, and not as a person whose emotions were a yard sale. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "You should have called me last night." "I know," I said. "I want you to bring the phone in," he said. "Do not delete anything. Don't respond to any more texts. Don't go back to the lodge." I said okay to everything he asked. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the snow stacking up on my street sign and felt 12 years old. At the sheriff's office, they took my phone like it was a weapon. Hill looked tired. He had that look you get in winter here, where all your color is gone, and your eyes are the only parts of your face that look alive. He set the phone down on the table between us. We found out who she was, he said. Driver's license in her jacket lining. It was stuck. Her name was Holly Archer, 32, from Portland. Portland, I said. Like that helped. She checked into the lodge at 3 p.m. yesterday, he said. Alone. We have her on camera at the front desk and in the hallway going to her room. We don't have footage of her leaving. He gave me a look. Before you ask, the cameras on the back hallway haven't worked in 3 months, and I didn't know that until this morning. The owner says he ordered replacements, and they were back ordered. Convenient, I said, and hated the sound of it. Hill rubbed his eyes. Nothing about this is convenient, he said. She's dead. That is what it is. We'll get her to Spokane for a full exam. But this other thing, you going back there, someone sending you photos, that makes my job harder and it puts you in danger. I know, I said. And I meant it. I knew. He looked at the photos on my phone. He looked at the one of the hooded figure and his mouth tightened. That could be anyone, he said without conviction. Could be a maintenance guy. Could be a guest. At midnight, I said. He slid the phone back toward himself like he was rethinking keeping it. Then he pushed it back toward me instead. Don't answer anymore, he said. If they send anything, you call me. Immediately. I wanted to ask him something that had been chewing at me since the night before. Why were there no footprints? I asked. Around her. When I found her. That doesn't make sense. Hill sighed and looked at the wall like it had an answer written on it. Wind can do things you wouldn't believe, he said. But his voice said he didn't believe it. I left the office feeling both better and worse. Better because someone else knew now, and worse because knowing wasn't the same as safety. I worked the afternoon shift on a different road and tried to think only about the blade angle and the way the snow makes a sound like shh under steel. As the sun dropped, the storm came back, not hard, but steady. It got dark at 4 like it does in January, and the part of my brain that had been calm put on boots and left me. Around 6, my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't look at it. I almost threw it into the passenger footwell and let it ride there like a hand grenade with the pin out. But I did look, because of course I did. It was a video this time, 4 seconds long. It was of me, sitting in the plow cab, taken from the passenger side, through the glass. The angle was tight, like the camera was up against the window. I could see my face in that stupid, concentrated squint I do when I'm trying to aim the blade. I could see the little crack in the windshield in the bottom corner. I could see, faintly, the reflection of the person holding the phone. A shape. The edge of a hood. A hand gloved in thick mittens. The message under the video said, "You don't learn." I pulled over fast and almost slid into a ditch. My stomach felt like it was trying to step out of my body. I looked around at the falling snow and the empty road and the trees that hold more dark than the sky. And I tried to picture the person out there, walking up beside my moving truck and slipping a phone up to the glass without me seeing. That was impossible. That meant the video wasn't live. That meant it had been recorded earlier, and they were sending it now to make a point. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. I called Hill. He picked up on the second ring. "Yeah," he said. "They sent a video," I said. of me and the plow. Looks like it was from earlier. Forward it, he said, and get somewhere with people. I drove to the gas station, the one with the coffee that is getting worse, and stood by the hot case while a teenager named Luis filled the warmer with burritos that looked like chalk. Luis nodded at me like I was a regular. I stood there longer than I needed to and watched a guy in a camo coat buy a 20-pack of beer. The normalcy made me want to cry. When I got home, my front step had a dusting of snow on it that made the footprints stand out like stamped signatures. There were 2 sets of prints on my step. One was mine, leaving that morning. The other was a single pair, leading up to the door, stopping at the mat, and then turning around and leaving. The stride was long. The prints were deep. My hand shook as I pushed the door, and it resisted because the latch catches sometimes, and I hate myself for not fixing it. And all I could think was that I was going to be in a news story about a guy who didn't fix his door and got murdered because of it. But the door opened, and the house was dark and still in the way your own space is still when you've been gone and no one came. I locked the door and sat on the rug with my back against it like a kid again. I checked the windows. I checked the basement. I checked the attic hatch and hated that I needed to. There was nothing. I made tea and held the mug with both hands and didn't drink it. My phone lay face down on the table like a small animal that might bite. It didn't buzz for the rest of the night. It didn't buzz the next morning. The silence worked on me like a sound. Around noon, Hill called. "We got something," he said, and his voice was the kind that is careful not to be hopeful. "The lodge has an outside camera that faces the back lot. The angle's bad, and the wind blew snow on the lens, but you can see a shape dragging a sled around midnight. Too far to ID. We also got a report from a guy who says he saw a blue tarp along the lake path last week. We're sending people out to probe the drifts." "You think there's more?" I said. Not a question. "I think we don't know," he said. "I think there's ice near the shore where the current runs, and I think there are holes under the crust. I think people do stupid things for reasons that look like reasons to them." "Okay," I said. "And Rick," he said, "seriously, don't go back out there." "I won't," I said. I meant it in that minute. Casey didn't call that day. I was glad. I didn't want to be the person who says don't come over because I don't trust you to not pull me back into dumb decisions. I watched an entire season of a show about people searching for gold and found myself rooting for rocks. At dusk, the silence broke in my phone like it had been waiting. The number buzzed and a message appeared without preamble. "You should have stayed away." Then another. "This is yours." A photo came through. It was of my front yard. The angle was from the edge of the street. It was the snowbank at the corner where the plow piles it up until it becomes a little white cliff. In the side of the bank, carved like the top of a cake, was a neat rectangular hollow. Inside the hollow, tucked into the snow, was a small brass badge with a pin back, the kind you get for 10 years of service from the county. It was mine. I'd left it in the pocket of a jacket last year and been pissed when I couldn't find it. In the photo, you could see the edge of a glove reaching in to place it, like a magician doing a reveal. I went to the door and looked out at the bank, and it was there, the little square space, but the badge was gone. The hollow was fresh. The edges were crisp. There were no footprints around it. I called Hill. I told him, He said he was sending a car. I waited, watching the window like a child watches an empty driveway on Christmas morning. I heard the cruiser's tires crunch and saw the blue wash of light sweep the walls of my living room. Hill himself got out with Dodd behind him, and for a second, I felt relief. Then Dodd looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, and all the hair on my arms lifted. "You hear from Casey?" Hill asked. It was an odd question. "Not since yesterday," I said. "Why?" Hill pressed his lips together and looked up the street. "He didn't show up to work today," he said, which isn't like him. His boss called us. A kind of quiet fell inside me then. Not the snow kind, the kind where the world narrows to a tunnel with one line of sight. I said no, and then no, again, like I could stop the idea by saying it twice. "We went by his place," Hill said. "Truck's gone." No one answered. Phone goes straight to voicemail. "I'm going out there," I said. I don't know where "there" was in that sentence, but I meant the place in my brain where the lines between choices were painted. Hill shook his head. "You're going to stay here," he said. "We're going to look. Dodd's going to sit in his car out front for a while. If you leave, I will arrest you for obstruction, and I don't want to do that." I looked at Dodd. He looked at me like he wanted to say something and didn't. He went back to the cruiser and sat with the engine running and the radio low. Hill told me to lock the door. He told me to call if anything else came. He told me a list of other things that I barely heard, because my brain had jumped ahead to the thing I knew was going to happen next. At 10, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up and walked to the window without meaning to. The message was another photo. This one was taken on the lake. The frame was tight. You could see a patch of ice where the snow had blown away. You could see a circle of dark water where the ice had broken. You could see the edge of a boot, the kind Casey wears, at the rim of the hole, and the tip of a pole held just out of frame. The caption said, "Slippery." I said his name out loud. I said it like a prayer or a curse. I went to the door, and then I remembered Hill's threat and turned back, and then I turned back again. And then I put my hand on the knob and felt the metal steady and cold. Dodd's cruiser was idling out front. I stepped out onto the stoop and he rolled down his window. "Don't," he said, no anger in it, just exhaustion. "They have him," I said. "They're going to." "They might not," he said. "And if you go out there alone, they'll have two. The lake is 5 miles from my house. I could drive it in 9 minutes, less in bad weather because the roads are empty and rules loosen." I went back inside and paced and put my hands on my head like that would keep my skull from coming apart. I waited for Hill to call and tell me I was overreacting, and that Casey had texts from a girl in Spokane and was on his way back, and that the photo was old. I waited for any world where this wasn't what it looked like. No call came. No more texts came. The night deepened into that part of winter night where the wind sounds like a living thing. Around midnight, Dodd's radio barked and he sat up, and then he got out and came to my door and knocked. I opened before he had to ask. His face was a hard line. "We found tracks," he said. "On the lake. We're going to follow them." "I'm coming," I said. "You're not," he said. He said it like a fact, not an order. "You're not, because if you come and something happens to you, I'll have to carry you, and I don't want to carry you." "I can help," I said, and I knew how it sounded. "You can help by staying alive," he said. "Do you have any idea how many ways the ice can fail? Do you know where the springs are? Do you know where the pressure ridges are?" "I do. I grew up on that lake. Stay put." He stepped back. "Lock the door." After he left, the house felt like a box I was going to be buried in. I stuck my head out the back and listened. Nothing but wind and the sound of a loose gutter tapping. I went to the drawer where I keep junk and pulled out a little handheld radio I use when I go out with Casey on his snowmobile sometimes, because shouting into the wind is useless. I had no reason to think anyone on the lake was on our frequency. I had no reason not to try. I flicked it on and static filled the room like it was a thing. I said, "Casey, if you hear me, answer." And of course there was nothing. At 1, Hill called. "We found a sled trail," he said. "We found a spot where someone went through the ice near the inlet. We don't know who." "Casey," I said, and my voice broke in the middle of his name. "We don't know," he said again. And then, because he is not cruel, he added, "We're not stopping." I couldn't stay inside. I know I should have. I know that now, and I knew it then. But my body was already moving. I put on my big boots. I put on my thick coat. I put on my hat and my gloves and the balaclava that makes me look like a cartoon burglar. I took the radio and my headlamp and the heavy wooden snow shovel that I told myself was a walking stick. I stepped out the back, over the new snow on my steps, and I followed the alley to the next street so I wouldn't walk past Dodd's cruiser. I cut through backyards, through my own stupid shortcut to the old logging road that leads to the lake. And every time I stepped and the snow crust held, I thought, yes. And every time it broke and I went down to my shin, I thought, I deserve this. I moved like a bad idea that you keep having anyway. When I reached the edge of the trees, the lake opened like a white sheet. The wind slapped me. The air was full of ice crystals that stung my eyes. I turned my lamp off because light makes you feel safer, but it makes you easier to see. I stood on the shore and looked left. Far off, I saw two slow bobbing lights. Sheriff's people, moving deliberate. I looked right. The path where the boat launches was a pale line. The exact place, I realized, where the photo of Casey's boot had been taken, if it was new and not some old shot pulled to mess with me. I went right. I told myself I would stay on the shore, on the hard sand under the snow. I told myself I would not step onto the ice. I lied to myself the way scared people do. At the shed, I called out. Not loud, just, "Case." The wind took it. I stepped down the shallow slope to the edge of the ice. The lake there freezes uneven. Springs feed it. There are places where thin ice looks just like thick ice under snow. We all know that. We all pretend we don't. Something dark showed where the snow had blown off. A circle, like the one in the photo. I walked closer, slow, planting the shovel before each step and testing like a cautious animal. I got close enough to see that the hole had refrozen at the edges, thin and new. The center was open water. The wind made a little chop in it that lapped at the ice with a sound like tongue on teeth. I said, "Casey," again, and the wind answered me in my own voice. Behind me, a shape moved between the trees. I spun and lifted the shovel like it would help. The shape didn't run. It didn't call out. It just stood. A tall figure in a heavy parka with the hood up and the fur around the edge combed out by the wind. It had the long pole in one hand. The other hand hung loose. The face in the shadow was just a darker hole. I said, "Who are you?" And it sounded silly even to me. The figure didn't answer. It took a step onto the snow toward the shore, and the snow held it like it was held up by something under it, like it was standing on a dock or a path I couldn't see. It took another step. It was 20 feet away. 15. I backed up without thinking, and my heel hit the lip of the refrozen edge, and it cracked, and I went down onto one knee, and the ice under my knee screamed that high, glassy sound, and the water came over the lip and soaked my pant leg and hit the skin like acid. I scrambled forward, and the ice held, and I got my foot back under me, and I stood, shaking. The figure didn't use the moment to rush me. It stopped like it was watching an animal in a trap. Then it lifted its free hand to its hood and pulled it back. I was ready for a stranger. I wasn't ready for recognition. It wasn't Dodd. Let me say that. I know a lot of people want the villain to be the one with the badge. It wasn't Hill either, and it wasn't Aaron. It was someone I knew less well than any of them, which made it worse in a way because I couldn't fill in a story about it that made sense. It was a man named Carl who worked at the lodge doing maintenance, the kind of guy you see around the edge of things. Not unkind, not friendly, missing a tooth from a basketball injury 20 years ago. He has, or had, I should say, a way of standing with his shoulders up like he's expecting to be cold all the time. He looked the same. He also didn't look like himself at all. "Carl," I said, like his name might make him into someone not standing where he was. He said, "You weren't supposed to be here." His voice blew toward me and broke apart in the wind. "Where's Casey?" I said. It was everything. It was a scream that didn't get loud. "Where is he?" Carl looked at the hole and then at me. "You shouldn't have touched her," he said. His eyes were flat in the hood shadow. "You shouldn't have come to the room." "I didn't touch her," I said. "We didn't." "Carl, what are you doing?" He pointed with the pole at the edge of the ice and then at my feet, like a warning. "You're not careful," he said. "You stomp around and you don't listen." "I'm listening now," I said. "Tell me where Casey is." He ran the gloved fingers of his free hand along the pole like it was a rail, and he needed to feel it. "People come up here in winter, and they don't understand," he said. "They think the lake is a map they know. They think the lines are where they think they are. They don't see what's under the snow." He had that way of talking you hear sometimes from people who've spent too much time alone. The words are pieces that don't match until you're deep into the conversation, and you realize what he's been saying is a story he's told himself 1,000 times. "She died," he said. "She went out without a hat and she died. That's what happened." "Why the sled?" I asked. I felt like if I could keep him talking, if I could keep him in this space with me between the hole and the trees, time would extend. Hill would get here. Someone would put a warm hand on the back of my neck and I would stop shaking. "Because people don't leave bodies in the open," he said, like it should be obvious. "Animals come. Snow gets dirty. People like you find them. Then it's a thing. Then there's talking." He made a face like the word tasted bad. "It's better if they go under. It's better if they don't sit with their mouths open. You put her under the ice, I said, and I had to swallow hard. He didn't answer. You've done this before, I said. It wasn't a question, but I wanted it to be. I wanted him to say no. This was the first time, and it was a mistake, and he was panicked, and he didn't know what to do. How many? I asked. He looked at me like I was making a joke in a language he didn't speak. You ever count trees? He said. You ever count flakes? Don't do that, I said. I heard myself and wanted to throw up. Don't make it poetic. Don't make it big. Answer me. He tilted his head like he was listening for something else. Far off, I heard one of the bobbing lights call out, the metallic thump of a probe pole on ice. They're coming, he said. He didn't sound worried. He sounded tired. You brought them. They were coming anyway, I said. You sent me pictures. The anger lifted its head in me. You sent me pictures of me and told me to stay away, and then you kept making me look. He shrugged in a way that said he didn't care whether I got it or not. You would have anyway. You're the type who wants to lift the tarp. Your friend is too. I didn't want to ask the next question. I had to. Is he under there? Carl didn't look at the hole. He looked at me. His eyes were dark and small. He said, He's where the snow holds. And the way he said it made my teeth hurt. The wind hit us both hard enough to lean, and I took 2 quick steps backward without thinking, and the edge of the hole cracked again, and I felt the give under my left foot, and then the ice went out from under me, and the cold hit my waist like a wall. The water closed around my legs and sucked like mud, and the shock was so bright I couldn't make a sound. I went into my hips and jammed the shovel across the hole and grabbed it with both hands. My gloves went underwater and the cold drove needles up my arms. The thought came like a simple sign. If I go under the lip, I'm not getting out. Carl didn't rush to help me, and he didn't step away. He watched me like I was an equation he wanted to see solved. I kicked and found the edge with one heel, and pushed, and the ice broke again, and I went lower, and my stomach went under, and I thought, this is how they go. This is how fast it is. The cold crawled up my ribs. It was a thing with hands. Help me, I said, and my voice came out like a squeal. Carl took 1 step, just one, and he stabbed the long pole across the hole so it lay parallel to my shovel and said, "Grip." And I did, and the pole was a line that connected him to me. I pulled and he leaned back and I slid enough to get my knees up and he said, "Kick." And I kicked and the ice broke in chunks and the chunks banged against my thighs. And then I was up and I rolled onto the ice and lay there making a sound I didn't know I could make. Carl picked up his pole and stood over me and said, "You see?" Like he was a teacher, and I was the kid who finally got it. I crawled away on my elbows, not trusting my legs. When I stood, my pants were frozen into a shell that crackled when I moved. I was shaking so hard I thought I'd drop my teeth. "You could have let me drown," I said. It wasn't a thank you and I didn't want it to be. "I could have," he said. "I don't care about you. I care about the noise." He nodded toward the lights coming slow across the ice. "They'll go where you went. They'll find the hole. They'll probe. They'll do the thing. It's what they're for." "Where is he?" I said again, just air this time. Carl pulled his hood up and tied the strings with measured motions like they mattered more than my question. "You don't learn," he said. And then he turned and moved into the trees on the little path he knew and was gone like deep snow can swallow a person if they know how to let it. I made it back to shore by walking where his pole had marked the way. The lights reached me then, and I shouted and they answered, and I fell to my knees, and one of them put hands on my shoulders, and the warmth through my coat made me cry. They walked me to a truck and put me in and wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like smoke and old dogs. Hill's face leaned in and he said my name twice the way you say a spell. I told him about Carl. I told him where he went. I told him about the path only he could see. I told him about the hole. The words came like marbles falling out of a jar. He put his hand on my shoulder again and didn't say anything for a minute, and then he said, "We'll find him." They didn't. Not that night. Not the next. I could tell the story about what they did find. They found 3 places along the shore where the ice had been cut carefully with a saw, not broken. They found 2 blue tarps frozen into those places like seaweed under clear water. They found, close to one of those, a handful of buttons from a coat like Holly's. They found, a week later when the weather warmed for a day, the body of a man from Idaho who had been on the missing list for a month, under a thin plate of ice near the inlet where the current runs strong. His name was not Casey, but that hardly mattered. They found the sled finally in a thicket back from the path, hidden under branches, blue paint scuffed, rope crusted with ice. Next to it was a stack of old 2x4s with marks on them from the pole. They found a box of keys from the lodge with numbers stamped into black plastic. They found room 17's tag in that box. It had been wiped, but with gloves you still leave grease. They put it in a bag and treated it like a sacred object. They found Carl, not dead, alive. He was in a cabin 3 miles from the lodge that he should not have had access to. He didn't run. He didn't confess. He didn't deny anything either. When they searched the cabin, they found a freezer like you'd keep elk in. And in the freezer were wrapped bundles that made the deputies go outside and breathe air until their stomachs settled. They found a notebook with numbers and dates and short notes like, "Found by road," "Didn't see," "Moved her," "Quieted," "Under." They found a page with my name on it, and Casey's. I didn't go to the arraignment. I didn't go to the trial. I didn't read the articles after the first burst when the reporters came from Spokane and Seattle and tried to make our lake into a symbol for something. I didn't watch the interview with a woman who had stayed at the lodge and said she saw a man dragging a tarp one winter years ago and thought it was fish. I didn't want to live in those words. Here is what I did do. I kept my job. I plowed the roads and I learned to watch the edges better. I fixed my front door latch. I got a dog from a rescue in Yakima, a sad brown thing with a white streak on her chest, who took to sleeping on my feet like she'd been assigned the task. I kept my radio in my pocket on night shifts, and I turned it on sometimes and listened to the static, like it was a kind of ocean that reminded me I wasn't the only person awake. I went to see Casey's mom. She hugged me and she said, "It isn't your fault," before I could say anything. And I didn't argue because the person whose son is gone gets to say what's true. We sat at her table and drank tea and looked out at the street. And she told me about this time when Casey was 7 and insisted on sleeping in a snow cave he'd dug, and how she worried the whole night, and how in the morning he came in with a grin and purple lips and said it was the best sleep of his life. We laughed. Then she cried. Then I did. Sometimes at night something hits me like a physical thing, and it's the knowledge that if I hadn't taken the picture by the body, if I hadn't gone to the lodge, if I hadn't walked down the path, if I hadn't said, "Let's just look," then none of it would have happened. That's the kind of thought that eats you. I know it isn't that simple. The other truth is that Carl would have done what he did whether I was awake or sleeping. He had been doing it. The lake had been taking people. The only new thing was that I saw. The winter after, I plowed the turnout by Black Pine, and the snow spun off the blade like a curtain, and there, under an inch of fresh, was a bouquet of plastic flowers stuck into the drift. Someone had come and left them, and no wind had taken them yet. They were bright blue and silly and beautiful. I stopped the plow and sat and looked at them for a long time. Then I got out and stood in the wind until my ears hurt, and I said the names I knew, quietly, so the air could take them. Every once in a while, not often, I still get a text from that number. It's never a threat now. It's never a photo of me. It's a photo of the lake at dawn, or the lodge under fresh snow, or the path under the birches with the wind drawing snakes in the powder. No caption, just the image. I've changed phones. I've changed numbers. They keep coming. I took the last one and I showed it to Hill, and he made a face like he'd smelled something wrong. He said, "It's probably someone trying to screw with you." He said, "Don't let them." He said, "Delete it." I did. But it didn't change the fact that for a second, holding that photo, I could feel the air on the shore, and I could hear the sound the water makes under thin ice, that little clink and breath, and I could smell the lodge's old coffee. And I could feel the exact moment when I knew that some part of me was going to be stuck in that winter forever. That's the whole of it. I can tell you the dates and the names and the part where the court said things that make it fit on a page. I can also tell you the parts you can't write down. The sound of the drag. The way the hood turns a face into a dark. The way snow preserves and erases at the same time. The kind of quiet that feels like a person is holding their breath in the next room. That's what winter does. It makes everything quiet. It covers the noise with a blanket. But some things still make it through. Some sounds find a way. And when they do, you remember them in the middle of the night, and you sit up and you listen, and you think you hear the scrape of something heavy out there, careful in the snow, and you tell yourself it's a truck a few streets over, or the plow blade bumping a manhole cover. And you go to the window anyway and you look out and it's just your yard and the powder is smooth, and the porch light is making little crystals shine, and it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Until the wind shifts and you see the faint line where something was dragged, and then the snow fell, and the world erased it almost all the way. Almost. But not quite. And you stand there and watch the empty yard like it's going to answer you, like it's going to tell you what you want to know. And it doesn't. That's it. That's what I've got. I wish it were different. I wish I could end it with a lesson that makes you feel safe again, or with some tough guy line like I learned something about myself. I didn't. I learned that the lake keeps secrets. I learned that people do too. And I learned that if you find a dead body in the snow, you think that's the moment everything changes. But the truth is, the moment everything changes happens a few steps later. When you decide to take one more look. When you decide to follow the drag marks instead of turning back. That's when the story opens. That's when the cold you can't shake gets in. I moved back to my hometown for a while after my mom got sick. It was supposed to be temporary. A month, maybe 2, until we figured out care and finances. I hadn't lived there in years. The town was smaller than I remembered. One main street, a diner, a hardware store that smelled like metal and old coffee. I rented a small duplex on the edge of town because it was cheap and close enough that I could run home between shifts. The landlord was an older guy named Carl, who looked like he'd been around forever and charged me cash. No deposit, no fuss. It felt fine at first. The duplex was built in the 50s, 2 stories, narrow porch, floorboards that whined if you walked across them the wrong way. My place was the top unit. It had a tiny kitchen, a living room with a crooked window, and a bedroom I could barely fit a queen mattress into. There was a backyard that backed onto a stand of trees, maple and birch mostly, and the whole place smelled faintly of mildew and cedar. At night, the house settled and made noises like any old building. I'm used to that. What I'm not used to is the sense you get like a room is watching you. It started months after I moved back, probably a little less than a year in. I was working nights at a call center and sleeping through the day. One morning, waking up at around 3 p.m., I noticed mud tracks on the hallway carpet. Not little tracks, big and heavy like someone had been in work boots. I live alone. I locked my door. No one else had a key. I blamed the landlord. Maybe he'd sent someone to check the heater and didn't tell me. I asked Carl the next time I saw him, and he acted like it was nothing. Old houses get leaks, kid. Folks come looking. He didn't have a name, didn't mention a time. After that, things got stranger. Little things that didn't make sense. My coffee mug would be in a different cupboard. The radio would be on static when I turned it off the night before. Once, I swore I left my front door chained and latched. But when I woke up, the chain was clipped and the deadbolt was loose. I replaced the chain with a stronger one. The next day, the chain was propped on top of the fridge, like someone had tossed it there absent-mindedly. I told myself I was exhausted. I told myself grief will do that to you. Make you miss things. Make you misplace things. Make you look for patterns where there aren't any. But the feeling of being watched got worse. It wasn't constant. More like a presence that hovered on the edge of the day. Quiet enough to ignore unless you paid attention. And of course, because I'm a human, and I never do the sensible thing, I started testing it. See, that's the kind of mistake we make in the stories you hear around bonfires. Poke the thing and expect it to move politely. One night I came home late, around 2 a.m., after a rough shift. I opened the door and called out, "Hey," like someone might be around. No answer. The living room light was on. That was weird. I never left lights on because the electricity bill was a nightmare. I stood there and listened. The house hummed quietly with the refrigerator and the furnace. I flicked the light off and heard the soft scrape of a chair against the hardwood like someone had just stood up. That was the exact wrong noise to hear at 2 a.m. in your own living room. My breath stuck in my throat. I walked through the room slowly, hands soft at my sides, like I might touch something fragile. Nothing. The chair was where it should be. The couch cushions looked untouched. The only thing different was the mantel over the little electric fireplace. My mom kept this old wooden clock that barely worked. the kind that ticks too loudly until it doesn't tick at all. And there were 3 new scratches on the wood. Shallow, but deliberate, like someone had dragged something across it. I ran my finger down one scratch and felt a faint grit under my nail. Mud. Fresh. That was when I really started to worry. Not because of the scratches, but because I couldn't explain how someone got in and left those tracks without me hearing the door. The windows were locked. The lock on my bedroom door was still in place. I could feel my heart beating in my throat and my palms went damp. I called Carl. He said he'd checked the place, but when he left, he looked at me sideways and said, "You sure you okay, kid? You look tired." I wasn't okay. I stopped sleeping through the day. I started going over every sound in my head and cataloging every minute. I installed a cheap door jammer I'd seen online and pushed a heavy dresser in front of the bedroom door at night. It made me feel safer for about 2 weeks, until the dresser was pushed a few inches away from the door in the morning, like someone had tried to open it and couldn't quite manage. The metal jam bar had scratch marks on the end, like someone had used it as a pry tool. I told myself, again, it must be a person. Maybe a homeless guy found a way in through the attic. Maybe a neighbor with a grudge. Maybe, and this is what kept me up, it was just the house settling and my brain adding a villain to the story, because it was easier to believe in a person than the idea that I was losing my mind. Either way, I called the police the next time the dresser moved. They came, 2 tired-looking officers who asked me a few questions, wrote some things down, and left me with the advice to keep my doors locked. No prints, no signs of forced entry. "Could be the wind," one of them said, like I was going to accept that. Then the dreams started. At first they were small, walking down the hallway of my childhood home, except the walls were too tall and the lights dim. I'd wake up sweating and think, "Weird dream," and forget it. But the dreams changed. They started to show me things I hadn't seen. In one dream, I'm in the backyard, and there's someone standing by the trees. Not a person exactly, more a silhouette with the wrong angles. In the dream, it tilts its head like a dog sniffing the air. When I woke up that morning, there were sap stains on the back porch steps, like something had dragged itself across the wood. I scrubbed them off, but the pattern stayed burned in my brain. Long fingers, smudging. The worst dream came 3 nights after that. I was asleep and then standing in my kitchen, and the place felt wrong, brighter and quieter. The silhouette was in the doorway, and when it moved I heard the softest humming. Not a song I knew, just a set of notes. It didn't have a face. Where a face should have been, there was a smooth plane that reflected light like the surface of still water. It raised its hand and traced the air in front of me, and I felt a pressure on my skin like an incoming storm. Then it leaned forward and whispered something not with sound, but with a memory. I woke up choking, like something had pressed a pillow to my face. I stopped telling people about the dreams because I didn't want to sound insane. But one night, I told my sister over the phone that I thought someone was in the house. I tried to explain the sense of weight, the scratches, the moved dresser. I didn't talk about the dreams. She laughed it off and said I sounded like Mom after her medication changed. "You know how she gets when she doesn't sleep," she said. It hurt because she believed Mom when Mom was scared, but she didn't believe me. I hung up frustrated and alone. A week later, the silhouette walked through the front door. It was late, later than I like to be awake, and I was making dinner. The kind of half-cooked pasta you eat while scrolling through your phone. The house smelled like garlic and cheap oil. I heard the front door open and close behind me. I assumed, stupidly, it was Carl or one of the neighbors. I called out, "Hey, I'm in here," but my voice felt small in the room. No answer. Then it stepped into the kitchen, and everything rational flipped to static. It was the same shape as in my dreams, except closer and wrong in ways my brain stumbled over. No eyes, no mouth, just that smooth, reflective face. It moved like someone learning to walk for the first time, with uncertain long strides. I could hear the floorboards complaining under its weight. It didn't smell like anything human. There was no sound except that low hum, like winded bass. I backed away slowly until my hip hit the counter. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the wooden spoon, and it hit the tile with a hard clack that sounded gigantic. The creature turned its head toward the noise, and I realized with a lurch that it wasn't giving off light. It was eating it. The corners of the room darkened. My phone screen dimmed. Even the pasta in the pot looked like it wanted to vanish. It made a motion then, not toward me, but toward the living room, like it wanted me to follow. Panic makes your body move before your brain catches up, so I did. It walked ahead of me, and every step it took, the house sighed like a giant sleeping thing. It stopped in front of the mantel and raised its hand. I watched it press a single long finger into the wood, right where the original scratches had been. Where the finger touched, the wood groaned and split, and a small crack opened, like skin parting. Out of the crack slithered something like smoke, but dense, like fog made of wet cloth. It pulled itself out and spread across the room like spilled ink. In the middle of the fog, something was forming. Not a face, but a suggestion of a shape. It blinked, if you can call it that, and I felt like I had been seen in the way you feel seen when someone remembers a secret you've tried to bury. I don't know why I wasn't screaming. I think it was because the creature moved with such calm inevitability that my fear felt small and irrelevant. It floated toward me, and when it was close enough that I could feel cold on my skin, I heard the hum again, now layered and deep like an organ. The voice came then, not through air but through something inside my skull, and it said one word: home. It doesn't sound like much typed out, but the way it said it was heavy with accusation and misunderstanding, like a visitor who had come to an address looking for something and was annoyed it took so long. I threw whatever I could grab at it, a jar, a cookbook, but the objects went through it like it was fog. They slid past and clattered to the far wall. The creature didn't flinch. It extended two long fingers and touched my forehead. For a second, the world folded. I saw my mother's face in a hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic, the numbers on a monitor. I saw my childhood dog, the one I'd left behind, wagging its tail in a sunlit yard. I saw the duplex as if it was different. Doors open, people moving in and out, furniture covered in sheets, the land behind the trees like a field of graves. When it let go, I was on the floor, and the kitchen was normal again. The mantel was whole. The scratches were gone. The fog had retreated, and the creature stood in the doorway, like it hadn't been there at all. It raised its hand in something that looked like a sad, patient wave and walked out through the front door. You could hear the latch click. I called the police. I called Carl. I called my sister. And her voice was small on the other end, and full of that sick sympathy people use until they realize they can't help. Officer Jensen, the one who'd come before, answered this time, and he wasn't amused. He drove over with his partner and searched the place again, slower this time. The neighbor across the hall even came because he'd heard me yelling. They found no indication anyone had been inside besides me. No footprints, no fingerprints, not even a mud smear. The officer looked at me with those patient eyes police get when they don't want to say you're wrong, but they also don't want to lie. "You been drinking?" he asked. "Not tonight," I said, and I believed it. I hadn't been. I told them everything, and at the end of it, Jensen put his hand on my shoulder and told me to try to get some sleep and to call if anything happened again. He left a pamphlet about local mental health services in my hand like a Band-Aid. I moved out the next day. I didn't tell people the whole truth about why. I said the place was drafty. I said I needed somewhere closer to Mom's house. I packed in a fog of adrenaline and humiliation and put my life in the back seat of my hatchback and drove away with the lights on. Carl took the rent he'd been owed and didn't ask questions. The duplex sat there after I left, windows like blind eyes, and for a while I checked from the road to see if anyone moved in. People forget fast. A month later, there was a moving truck and new faces, new boxes on the porch. I watched them from across the street and thought, maybe it stops with me. Maybe whatever that thing was moves on when it gets the scent of another life. But one night I drove by late and saw a man standing on the porch, smoking, staring at the trees behind the duplex. He flicked his cigarette into the grass and watched it burn. He seemed normal. I wanted to get out and tell him not to stay, but the words wouldn't come. I drove home and turned the radio up so loud the road hummed. It's been a few years now. I moved 3 times after that. Mom passed away and the grief rearranged my life like wind moves papers on a desk. Sometimes, in a new apartment at 2 a.m, I wake up and think I hear something in the hallway. My first reaction is not rational. It's the exact old muscle memory of cold, and the sound of nails on wood, and the feeling of being sized like a possession. My hands go to the phone, and for a second I think about calling someone, about telling anyone. Mostly I wait and listen. Whatever it was never came with violence. It never raised a hand to me in anger. It tested. It watched. It touched. If it had been a person, maybe it would have been different. Maybe I would have found footsteps outside and a face at the window. But this thing wanted something else. It wanted me to remember. It wanted me to understand a place is not only where you live, but where you belong. And sometimes a place remembers you in ways you can't. And sometimes those memories come back looking for renters. I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up and am convinced there's a shape at the foot of my bed. I turn on the lamp and it's just the coat rack. I tell myself I'm safe. I tell myself it was a thing of that duplex, and that it belongs there. But every now and then, when I pass an old wooden mantel, or watch a light reflecting off still water, I get the feeling of a presence that knows the shape of my life down to the scars. It's patient. It's quiet. It calls to things that are called home. And in the part of me that still flips through memories like I'm trying to find a missing page, I'm afraid I, one day, will forget what I told myself in the minutes after it touched my forehead. Maybe memory is a house you can't leave. Maybe there's always something standing on the porch, waiting for someone to come back inside.